Okay, and we're live. Okay, so I want to just start with a brief little bit of context. Ross, I had watched you and Paul Vander Klay talk, and then I had reached out to you on Substack, and you've talked to some other people that I know, and then we were just backstage, and you kind of told me how your life works. So I'm going to link the Paul Vander Klay video because that's helpful. And then you also recently had a conversation with Jordan Hall, and I watched that. And so some of these questions are kind of coming out of both of these videos. So I'll link that. And if people are, curious and want to do the Ross Byrd deep dive, we're going to give them all the information they could possibly want.
Yeah, nobody needs to do the Ross Byrd deep dive, but Paul Vander Klay did.
Do the Ross Byrd deep dive. Can you give us like the quick version of what you do in 9 months and what you do in 3 months, the rhythm of like the year of your life and et cetera?
Yeah. So in a couple of weeks, I'm going to move from where I am now, which is in Virginia Beach, Virginia, which is where I'm from, where my family lives for about 7 months out of every year. And I'm going to move down to the Outer Banks of North Carolina, which is 2.5 hours from here. Down on Hatteras Island, which is kind of the least commercialized, still kind of romantic dirt roads part of the East Coast. And that's where we run our surf camp for 3 months. And then we'll be down there for another 2 months. We've just become more integrated in that community as well. And so we've tried to extend our stay there beyond when we're working our butts off for, 5 a.m. to midnight every day. We stay for September and October, which is a really nice time of year to be there. We can do that because our family homeschools our kids. And so we'll be there from mid-May to probably the end of October. Then we'll move back to Virginia Beach, where we're from, where our kids are kind of anchored in both. Well, I guess now they're more anchored in both places. So those are the two places we live. In Virginia Beach, I help to run Virginia Beach Fellows, the teaching director there, and have a number of other kind of unofficial ministry things going on, but also homeschool my kids and run my small business in what little bit of work there is to do in the off season to get ready for surf camp again the next summer.
Okay. So I want to jump straight into a text message I received from Luke Freeman this morning. I said, I'm talking to Ross Byrd. What do you got? And he says, I guess the thing I've been mulling over is how we carve out more space for the commons. Is it simply expanding the scope of activities of the church? But as mainline churches are dissolving and evangelical megachurches are filling the space, it is hard to see Ross's vision for the commons being provided by American churches. Does Ross see his vision for the parish church creating a generative commons? Where are seeds of hope for fostering the commons?
Man, knockout question from Luke. Thank you, Luke. I don't know. I really don't know. That doesn't mean it's not worth talking about. I think I do see, I answer it in the affirmative. I do see, at least, I really try hard not to be an idealist about these things. And the thing I'm about to talk about doesn't really exist in the way that I'm about to talk about it. So that's just my big caveat is like, those who think talking about things that don't exist is not worth time and effort can log off now. But my answer to that is the parish model that I have in mind, I think used to do what I have in mind and can do it again. I'm not sure that it did it very well, even in the 1700s, 1800s, 1900s. And maybe that's part of the reason why it has mostly died. Because I'm speaking of kind of a mainline model of church where you have parishes, meaning neighborhood churches, that are not disconnected in the way that we sort of see non-denom world doing things now, where you have your pastor of, New Life Church here, or, so-and-so Bible church there, but churches that are connected to one another through, let's say, a common authority. Bishops would be the older word for that. And yet they are mostly governing in that sense I was talking to Jordan Hall about, in a hyper localized way, where they pretty much, their job is to know their village. Their job is to know their neighborhood. And then from there to do very little in the way of, I guess, what we would think of as church programs now. Mostly they're there to just be a center for prayer and worship, for the sacraments, for the ministry of the gospel in I guess the simplest imaginable sense. Hopefully with open doors, let's say, where you don't lock the doors of the church, and the priest's job is mostly to just be there to pray with people. And so I think from there, if you can reclaim that or claim it anew, let's say, I don't want to go backwards necessarily. I think, yes, it becomes a seat for a new kind of economy. And I'll just give a couple of examples. One thing that I think is helpful to attach to this is something like a graveyard. So I said, the church's call in my thing that I'm imagining here, which is not mine, it's just taking notes from the way churches have done things for a very long time, is to do very simple ministry, which, like I said, has to do with prayer and the sacraments, but it also has to do with, let's say, weddings and funerals, with the very basic foundation blocks for how to deal with the human race, marrying them and dealing with their death. And graveyards is a good example of that, because if you were to reinstitute, and I say that because most of the churches that I see in my town don't have graveyards around them anymore, or they have graveyards that are no longer doing that role, let's say, for people that are still dying in their congregations. If you were to reinstitute something like that, then the church would immediately offer a kind of continuity with its people, where you are, not only providing the service of ministering to families and the dead, but you are also creating a framework in which every time you go to worship, you are walking past or even over top of the buried saints who worshiped with you or worshiped before you, and thinking about yourself being buried in that place, which immediately gives a kind of economic investment. If you want to use a vulgar term for it there, but it gives you continuity with something that has become sort of gnostically detached from the rest of our everyday life. So that would just be one example. Weddings, I think, would be another, and I think you could sort of do the same thing with weddings, at least in my community of evangelicals who go to any number of different non-denominational churches. The churches themselves are usually not, let's say, beautiful spaces to have weddings. And so it's assumed by the pastor and by everyone else, every young person that goes there, that when they have their wedding, they might ask the pastor to come to it, but it's going to be at some rented barn somewhere that isn't actually a barn, but is a barn space to have a wedding. And, no judgment to these things. My wedding
is going to be.
No judgment to these things. And probably my kids would be too, because the spaces where we would do those things, just as the spaces where we bury people, are no longer, let's say, straightforwardly continuous with our worship.
Okay, so Luke's question to you, where he's talking about your conception of the parish, which you just kind of like beautifully laid out, and I'm going like, yeah, I'm all in. Let's talk some more about that. But where is that coming from? Because you and Luke had a conversation that hasn't been released yet. I'll get Luke's channel linked in here as well, so people can look for that.
I don't know if we recorded it.
Oh, it's
I
not
think
recorded.
It was just for fun. Yeah, I don't remember, but I don't think we recorded it.
Well, I'm going to link his channel anyways, just because he's got a great channel.
Agreed.
Have you written about this parish structure? Is this something that's just front of mind and you're spending energy moving towards? Give me more.
Yeah, there's an essay I wrote for Mere Orthodoxy about a year ago that's called A Parish Manifesto, sort of tongue in cheek with the manifesto part. But it is that, really. It is that. It's saying, look, here's some, I love the non-denom world. I am in it to some degree, but I wasn't born in it. I was born, to kind of continue to answer your question. I was born in the Episcopal Church, raised in the Episcopal Church, still am deeply connected to the Episcopal Church in which I was born and raised. I even worked there as a lay minister for a few years. And even now, when I worship for part of the year in a non-denominational megachurch and for another part of the year in a very small village Methodist church, that is very low church as well, I'm still pretty much just an Episcopalian, or you might call an Anglican, because Episcopalians are sort of going extinct these days. But and so marrying those things together, that is kind of my goal and my dream, in a sense, is that I am an evangelical and I'm not ashamed of, all the mega churches we go to, but I also see that they are unsustainable in some ways. That I think what I was just describing to you, things that the main line used to have, still has, but is not, let's say, stewarding very well, could evangelicals could have those things again. I mean, if you think about it, the evangelical revolution, in a sense, was a revolution of content at the expense of form. So the forms were all there. Like almost all of our great-grandparents went to a somewhat traditional church in one sense or another. They sort of knew that it was going to be vaguely liturgical, even if they were sort of like low church Baptist. It's still pretty liturgical. I was just doing the funeral at my grandmother's low church Baptist church. She was 90 some years old a couple of months ago. And I was just struck by how traditional the service still was, even though you might think of Baptists as being, let's say, the least liturgical of the mainline world. So anyway, I think what happened any number of years ago, and it happened across a couple centuries, if you want to really go for it. But I would say it happened especially, let's say, in the Billy Graham days, was there were so many people that knew what kinds of forms the church had to offer. They just were like, where is the Spirit to fill this body? It is nowhere. It's just like a bunch of empty rituals in so many churches across the country. We have the rituals, and yes, maybe they are beautiful, but they no longer feel very beautiful when it doesn't feel like people actually believe them anymore. And so a lot of the evangelical revolution was something like, Jesus's correction to the Pharisees, which is like, your whitewashed tombs. You kind of got all this form, but where is the content of your heart? Where is your heart seated? Does it actually love God? Or you could say it's the same message from the prophets, where they would say, God would say, I don't even desire your sacrifices anymore. Sacrifices without love, I do not desire. And so sacrifices without love is where a lot of our churches went to some degree, not all of them, of course. And so we corrected that by saying, bring back the love. But when we did that, we sort of forgot that the forms, a soul needs a body. And so when you want to have a kind of spiritual revival, it's very hard to do, but you need to remember that spirit must live in something. And so over time, I think we have let the form of our content go by the wayside and dissolve. And we've ourselves become somewhat accidentally Gnostic in our evangelical traditions. And what's weird is that this even goes for the traditions that have really remained, like the PCA church, which I would say is maybe the strongest kind of evangelical tradition, in that there's so many evangelicals that are there, and it's still sort of a traditional church. But even there, you can see that it takes on a kind of non-denom form over time that let's say, is not attached and continuous and embodied in the same way that my Episcopal church was growing up, or that most people's churches were 100 years ago. So.
Okay, so your title for this new is not as in brand new, but is parish?
Yeah. So the word parish, it just means neighborhood, from the Greek paroikos, and so that's what people used to call their church. You know how, like, in English, there's sort of a confusion between, when you say church, do you mean like your immediate local church, or do you mean like the body of Christ or whatever? So they would use the word parish so that everyone knew what they meant. They meant like their neighborhood church. And then the parish became a kind of governing structure, in a sense, because you would know, okay, you have your parish priest, and then you would have bishops that oversee something like a diocese, would be a group of parishes that are bordering one another. And then the bishop would oversee, let's say, a group of bordering parishes. And then you could have higher levels than that, I guess, too, but also lower levels within the church, like deacons and lay leaders. So.
And do you feel like you're able to envision a world where non-denom churches bring back some of this older stuff and recreate themselves into a parish model, rather than chasing kind of the endless growth of a mega church model?
Yeah, I do. I mean, that's what I'm proposing. You know, I'm not. It's not like I'm going to the dead mainline churches all over town and trying to revive it from there. I would like, though obviously they're welcome, and in the end, I'd probably like to be working with them, because they have all the beautiful buildings that sometimes even have graveyards next to them. In my town, and probably in most towns in America, we're watching those churches get torn down and turned into supermarkets, or sit vacant or nearly vacant for years because nobody knows what to do with them. But what's crazy is that it's like if you wanted to treat this like some kind of revolution, it's like a revolution where the skeleton is already there. The churches are just everywhere. There's already neighborhood churches in like literally every place all over America, because this thing, parishes, already existed. And so, you know, we went kind of hog wild with our evangelical movement, and we're like, we won't even have anything to do with those buildings. Oftentimes we'll just like be in the storefront, or the warehouse, or the gymnasium, or the movie theater, or whatever. And I think we've, maybe to some degree, a lot of the churches have matured past that phase where they build their own mega buildings, or maybe they take over a church like one of the ones that I'm talking about. In fact, I am at a satellite campus of our particular megachurch. It's like 6,000 people, but we bought a dying Presbyterian church for one of the satellite campuses, and that's where we worship. So it is like a traditional building, and about 300 of us is how big our satellite campuses are there. And yet, you know, the sermon is preached on a screen, you know, a big screen inside of this traditional church, and so it still has kind of a mixture of aesthetics. So yeah, my goal is mostly to preach to the evangelicals and say, hey, you know how we're running into that issue where mega churches are not doing all the things that we think the church should do as being big, but then even when you turn them into like satellite churches of a mega church, they still aren't quite doing the thing that you want to do. There's a reason for that. And let's talk about it. And so, yes, what I would like to see is a parish model.
Yeah, this interests me greatly, because so I was working in ministry, working in churches till I was 25. And then I left church and eventually left faith and God and the whole shebang for like 8 years. And it was just a couple months ago where I had a profound spiritual experience that returned me to trust in the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. And
wow,
the resurrection of Jesus, the anointed one, and living by the guidance of the Spirit of God. And most of my friends left megachurch land like me, and many of them have yet to return to church, but are like having kids and talking about coming back to church, because they're all like, I really appreciated growing up in church, but I got burnt out by the corporatism. And I got one friend that's like, I think I might just become a Catholic because I need some ritual and some stability. And I don't know that I can find that from evangelical non-denom land.
Yeah, I get that.
To hear you talking about, there's a world where non-denom could, I don't know if fuse with mainline is the right term, but almost like maybe the evangelical movement is kind of at the end of a bungee rope jump, and it's time to like start returning and recollecting some stuff into I don't know. I mean, I guess a better model or a better expression of faith in God.
Yeah, I like that image. I think it's really helpful. The way that I would describe that bungee rope is that going all the way down, it's been a movement of what I would call something like inclusion, or you could even just call it like evangelism, like reaching out, being open, come as you are. And I would say the rope going back would be something like holiness, where it's like the opposite of inclusion. Inclusion meaning bringing in, and holiness meaning set apart. Both are absolutely necessary. You can't pit them against each other in the sense that choosing one or the other would make you truer. It's only true to do both. But there are times when, let's say you do one at the expense of the other, and then you have to correct. And I would say that we're finding ourselves in a moment like that, where we have been so come as you are that people don't even want to come as they are anymore. They'd rather hear Jordan Peterson tell them to get their act together. And then they'll say like, I'll follow that guy, take me to the church that tells me to get my stuff together and that I'm gonna have to pick up my cross daily and follow him. And then I will stay there, even if they do weird religious things that 20 years ago we just said, don't worry, we're not religious. We just love Jesus. People will even take those religious things on because they not only want to be included, they want to be included into something. They want to be included into a holy people.
Yeah, I think that's a beautiful rendering of that. Okay, well, I want to move to like the question I had for you, which after listening to your conversation with Jordan Hall, I think you made the comment, something like the household could be the seat of industry. And you were kind of talking about, I think you used the phrase, a post-industrial society.
Yeah.
And that, to me, that feels very tied into this parish thing as well. And it sounds like you're arguing for, hey, everybody, there's another way to live. That there's a way that we could restructure society. And also, you don't need to wait for the government to restructure the world for you. You as a human being are capable of participating in a local restructuring. And it seems like you've achieved that to a degree in your own life, with your family, with your community. There's a whole group of you that are, if I'm understanding your life right.
Yeah, I wouldn't say that I've achieved it, but it's certainly what we're aiming at. And I would say maybe over the next 50 years is that we become a village or a series of villages again. It's hard. It's countercultural. And like you said, the government's not going to do it for you. It isn't obvious even to our churches that it's something that is desirable maybe yet, but I think it's becoming so. For example, we homeschool our kids. And when you start to homeschool your kids, unless maybe you're super closed-minded about it, you discover that homeschooling your kids is like not ideal. Like it school is not ideal for all kinds of reasons. Like, let's just say your generic public school, where elementary school is somewhat of a village, because usually, at least in my area, elementary schools are smaller. They are kind of in your neighborhood. You might actually know some of the teachers and there's a decent amount of accountability. But as you move up to middle school and as you move up to high school, it's like you just become this anonymous cog in the public school machine. That is definitely not desirable to me, to my kids. And yet the exact opposite of that, which is they're just stuck with me at home, is not, putting the worst spin on it. We actually really enjoy homeschooling, and I think our kids do too, but is not ideal either. The ideal to me is something like the village. It's something like I'm not the only one who's teaching my children and looking after them, and they're not only looking after their siblings, but that there's some mixture that is right and good and growing. I mean, this is a theme throughout the Bible. Neither marriage should not be too close or too far. Like you don't marry incestuously, but you also don't just marry someone from some other tribe that worships some other god. You have to have the right amount of distance and the right amount of intimacy. And the village, I think, is that. And so that's what I'm aiming my life toward as best I can. So.
Okay. So the household as a seat of industry, does that require every person to become an entrepreneur?
Yeah, I'm working on that right now because it's easier as an entrepreneur to sort of preach this way. And then for folks that don't have a super, like, let's say people that are more risk averse and just say, look, I'm just trying to get a job. And like, that's hard enough. It's a harder message to hear. So even when I talk to my fellows, 23, 24 years old about these sorts of ideas, for some of them, they get really excited about it, especially if they have, let's say, a kind of entrepreneurial spirit. And others of them are really intimidated to the point where they're like, why are we even talking about this? This just, before I was like happy just to go do my 9 to 5. And now you're making me unhappy, going to do my 9 to 5. And I wrestle with this because I think a lot of 9 to 5s really do make you unhappy, and they really are meaningless. Not everyone, and not because it's 9 to 5, but because our jobs, it's not that our job human beings oftentimes. And so it makes it harder and harder for us to sort of sustainably do that kind of work. But at the same time, a good leader doesn't just tell people this is bad, stop doing it. A good leader cuts paths through the wilderness and then says, here, you can walk here instead. And so that would be my goal, is that if you want to do anything sustainable, especially as a Christian, you can't just count on Christians to be Navy SEAL Christians in order to do it. You have to be able to make something that make the kind of structures that allow ordinary people to do extraordinary things, like get through the wilderness. And so to me, one way to cut paths through the wilderness toward a better, let's say, economic palette for up and coming young people is the church. It's actually to reform the church as a village, where your spiritual connections are also like deeply embodied connections, where you sort of meet the kind of, you say first people in place, and then calling comes from that, as opposed to the way we normally do it now, which is like, oh, I just want to do what I'm called to, and I'll go anywhere and I'll be with anyone in order to do that. If you can change that paradigm a bit and say, these are my people, this is my place, then, I mean, calling becomes beautiful, actually, because it's not just something that you're doing to make money. It's also not something you're doing just to like feel happy about yourself. You're doing it because it's where you belong, because someone needs you to do it. And that, to me, that's like the key to happiness, at least from, I wanted to say it in a non-spiritual sense, it would just be to be needed, to actually know that you are needed. And it's very hard to know that you're needed if you don't exist in a body. It's hard to be, what we are is like a bunch of disconnected hands and feet, which is like a very gross, image if you think about it. And so once you see yourself as that, you're like, oh my gosh, I better go be attached to something so that I cannot be gross anymore. And that's what I think the church could offer. But in my community, we've had debates about this, and there are others that think that the church will not be able to do, it's too impotent to be able to be the kind of center of that offering. And so there are entrepreneurial thinkers in my very community that are like thinking about how industry itself, how commerce itself can begin to also cut those paths at the same time. And even thinking about how, if you wanted to see it as like three estates, that would be like Martin Luther's way of talking about it. It'd be like the church, it would be the household, which is now kind of like household / market, because that word oikonomia is like, used to mean household. Now it just means economy, which has nothing to do with the household, like you were getting at. And then the third would be something like the government. But to me, the way you think about government at least the way that I would think about it, is just village government. You just basically ignore all national politics to the extent, or you pay attention to them only to the extent that they can allow you to have a village. I'll vote for the guy that allows me to have a village. And if there's something that's going to keep that from happening, which, to be honest, a good amount of things that are proposed in national politics are against everything that I'm talking about here, because they only want people to be individuals that serve this massive machine. But mostly, I think that third estate you pay attention to on the hyper local level. It's amazing in a somewhat free country like ours how much you can get done just by like being someone who gets stuff done. It's almost like lawmaking, but you don't have to make any laws. You just like say, hey, you go here, do this, stop doing that, do this instead. It's like a form of self-governance on the local level. So,
okay. So the three estates, is it the parish church or the church larger than that? The household, economy, and then government.
Government. Yeah. Each one of those, you can see how they're sort of fractal, right? So the church has to be hyper localized in the same way the government has to be hyper localized, like even governing within your own household. And then the market industry is hyper localized in the sense that you have to have an individual job, you yourself, which used to be most of the time within the household, both men and women, but no longer is after the industrial age. And so, and then you could take the household all the way out to, let's say, the global marketplace, right? And you could take government out to, unfortunately, to a similar degree, where it's not even the national government. It's like almost like there's a worldwide government, and then you can do the same with the church in a good way. That there is a universal, invisible, and yet real church on a global and timeless scale.
Okay, is one of the things to learn from the industrial age is that even right now I'm in Anchorage, Alaska, but I could create a business in the next week, and then that business could be funded by things from across the globe, which I don't think would have existed pre-industrial.
Right.
So this would be learning things from the industrial age, but bringing a lot from that earlier time into our world today. Does that make sense?
Yeah, you want to have a post-industrial age, not a pre-industrial age.
Yeah.
But obviously, when you begin to flirt with what that might mean, there will be some people you do, to some degree, for the sake of your imagination, have to think about pre-modern life. Because if you're going to go post-industry, if you're going to say like, okay, we're not going to depend on this whole phase, anymore to the same degree, then you have to think, well, how have we ever? What were we doing? What did we depend on before that existed? If we're not going to depend on it after, and hopefully, what you can do is begin to cheat off of the best things of an industrial and even a global market, and yet, I mean, this is more Jordan Hall's wheelhouse than mine, but he would say he has a term called civium, which is where you see the ways that cities have scaled, let's say, especially in industry, but long before that. And then you see the ways that cities have given rise to things like digital communication. And then at that point, he says there's almost like a breaking point, because what digital communication allows with something like the internet is a city that doesn't have to be a city. So you can cheat off of the connectedness. It's a city-like connectedness, let's say, that something like the internet gives you, but without the need to be miserable in the city, which not everyone is, but let's say any number of people are, and there are any number of city miseries that we might want to overcome and move beyond. And it is also very hard to have villages in a city, because cities are so interconnected that you end up becoming a citizen of something that scales so quickly that it's hard to be very embodied in that place. So he would say use the technologies that we have to do things in a more desirable and smaller scale again. There are some problems within that, though, that I know Jordan would say which I think he said in our recorded conversation, are still seemingly almost impossible to solve, which is the scaling of, the making of certain kinds of things. How are you going to, I think he used the example of the iPhone. We've got this technology which could allow you to be free and live in your, wonderful little village in the middle of North Carolina and still work like you were living in Manhattan. And yet you're depending on any number of people in China who put these parts together in this big global economy to allow you to have that technology. And I don't think that we're going to start making villages anytime soon that make iPhones in America. And so Trump's tariffs have been very interesting to me in that regard. Once you start seeing the world through this lens, it's like, you're almost like, bring on the pain, it just, yes, it's going to crash the economy, but what economy is it crashing? Is it one that we want to, and I'm not actually saying that. And honestly, I don't understand Trump at all. The way that he seems to be going about it is incomprehensible to me. But the notion, of course, of just having any other thought besides like infinite globalism forever makes plenty of sense to me, I guess is what I'm getting at.
Yeah. I mean, so much of what you're saying for me is like immediately practical and applicable as I'm like on the verge of starting a family, looking at buying land to have a home, figuring out how am I going to carve out a career from my life, which I have yet to do. My fiance has a great career, but I'm still working on my end. We're running out of time here, so I want to respect your time. I have two questions, I guess. So the first question is, when you look at the village, I'm imagining this parish is the center of the village.
Yeah, that's what I imagine.
What else are you looking at as taking up space in the village?
Well, again, kind of like I started the conversation, I don't know, but I think that you just mentioned the word career. So one of the things that I preach to our 20 somethings is careers are done. Don't even have a career, and of course I'm somewhat tongue in cheek because there still need to be some careerists. Doctor, it's very hard to imagine, let's say, being a doctor without buying into the massive institution for years and years and years that it takes to enter into this institutional workforce, part of the workforce that is highly sophisticated. And so by all means, have a career as a doctor, though even there, I would want, my fellows to count the cost of what it means to be that married to an institution. But I hope that some will count the cost and still do it because doctors do some good things. But for the most part, I think too many of us are thinking along the lines of career, which is kind of thinking, what am I going to do before thinking, who are my people and where is my place? And if you allow yourself to switch that paradigm and you say, okay, first off, my career is just to love God. That is actually my career. And the other part of that career is to love neighbor. And the trouble with the second part of that career is that you have to have neighbors to love neighbors. So it isn't just love, and it isn't love everybody. It's love your neighbor. And so then you actually have a first practical step to take, which is figure out a neighborhood and who then you'll have neighbors. And then it sounds quite, I don't know, idealistic or whatever, but like, then you actually will have a job because your job is to love your neighbor. And so the work that you do that makes money, it would be great if it would somehow begin to be interconnected to the work that you do for God. And God has not been, a tyrant about that work. He's made it quite broad. Love your neighbor and love him. But there are so many jobs that simply are not interconnected to that, or at least they are in such a backdoor kind of way that you found yourself 20 years into a career to which you feel like you're a slave to whatever institution it is. And then you're like, okay, I've got to, hopefully I can just like talk to somebody about Jesus at the, at the watering hole, in the middle of my office building or something like that. And that's great too, but It's reverse engineering the part that should be the foundation. And Lewis has a great term for this. He talks about, I might have mentioned this to Jordan. He talks about the kind of modern hellscape of having to choose between individualism and communalism, and how there's just this like endless war in our secular world between the two. And he says the answer is membership. That is the Christian. It has always been the Christian answer. It is neither hyper individualized nor hyper communalized societies. There is a body. You find your place in that body. Then you will be a member of that body, which means that you will serve that body, and you yourself will have also found your individual place. Your place will be discrete and, let's say, well-defined and diverse compared to other parts of the body, just like individualism does, except for better, because it also fits, it belongs, it has a purpose that is bigger than you and beyond you. And every time you go to the movie theater and you watch a movie and you see the hero, you're like, I want to be like that person. And the hero is not like the person who just found their greatest job at Bank of America. The hero is always someone who found something bigger than themselves to suffer for. And so, anyway, that's what I think you can do on a very local level very easily.
Well, and that membership riff that you went on, you tied part of that into, you had a recent Substack post about marriage, and that was central to everything you were arguing for with turn your marriage or move your marriage from a compromise model towards a partnership model. I found that really profound then. I find it profound now, and this membership thing. And you're talking about that as well with the parish and with a village. This is all membership is
it's pretty much central
to the body of Christ. And so
yes.
You become how do you say it? You remember yourself into that.
Exactly. And that's fractal too, right? So your household, you want your kids to feel like they're members of the household, like they have something to, like my son, who you saw, who was dusting behind me. You want them to feel like they not only like exist there, but belong there because they have something to give, something to do there. And so on every level, I think thinking in terms of membership really helps. I've got a few more minutes if you want to continue on this line of thought. I think I've got like 20 minutes, so but you can go anytime you need to.
Okay, no, yeah, we'll do 20 minutes. You bet, I'll take it. Well, the next thing I wanted to ask you about, which is, separate but related, is so I think your most recent Substack post was the May Bible reading plan.
Yeah.
But there was a link in there that I don't remember what the title of it was, but it took me to a page where you had a list of community rhythms, practices. Will you talk about that? Because I read that and I went, oh shoot, I might be joining Ross's community with these practices, because like I don't have that in my life right now. My fiance and I, for the last 4 weeks, we've been going to different denominations in Anchorage, which has been a really beautiful thing. She grew up Catholic, both sides of her family, and then I grew up evangelical, non-denominational. So it's been cool to go to mass with her, and it's been cool for her to come to non-denom with me. But then neither of us are interested in non-denom or Catholic. We have yet to experience Anglicanism, but we both
sounds like it might be a good solution.
Interested in sort of a high church Protestantism to a degree. But there was a church here in Anchorage. It was a Ruthenian Greek Catholic church. So a fusion of East and West, but still within Catholicism. And that was a beautiful experience. It was unlike anything else. And so it's been really, really neat to see so many different traditions and different groups of people following Jesus. So yeah, but talk about your practices and how y'all do that.
Yeah. So this is C.S. Lewis again, but he talks in I think it's in Meditations on the Psalms, but he talks about praise and worship and the kind of rituals of praise and worship being practiced for heaven, I guess you would say. So he says, look, it's not always going to be, ecstatic. It's not always even going to be happy or feel sincere. But what we are often doing is we're digging out the trenches, let's say, digging out the ditches for when the rains come. And when the rains come, you will have these forms by which, the water can be dispersed beautifully and in the way that it should. That's the image that he uses. And he's saying that kind of like preparing for heaven. He's like, on this side of heaven, maybe our worship will not even hold a candle, hopefully in some sense. It won't even hold a candle to when we see him face to face and when we do nothing but worship him. But he's saying that now we can join in that. We can participate in it by beginning to almost dig out or you could even say begin to build the scaffolding for when the Spirit moves. And he means that even in this life, when the Spirit comes and you're like, I am experiencing you, God, then the right troughs or trenches are there for the water to flow. And so I guess I would take that same image and say that for those of us who feel a little bit church homeless, you can almost begin to prepare yourself for church. If church itself is the very presence of God, in a sense, it is seeing him face to face, to go and take communion, to eat of his flesh and to drink of his blood. We all have found ourselves in moments where we are not, let's say, in full communion, or we are not at home in the church, or we're just not at home in any church because we don't know where to be. Like you guys are getting married. I mean, that's always a tricky time because you've got to marry different traditions together, and you might be moving from one church to another for a little while. But this is part of what I see these practices as is a way not to replace church, but to kind of begin to get the shape of your life to be church shaped, to be worship shaped now. And it not only serves the practical purpose of preparing you for the church, it also serves the spiritual purpose of kind of like being the shape of our faith. You can only go so long saying you believe stuff without doing the thing that you say that you believe. And so these are 5 practices in that regard. The first is scripture. It's I put out a Bible plan every month, but you wouldn't have to use mine. I mean, every great tradition has a lectionary, though. Like we've been talking about, not that many Christians are traditional anymore, so they maybe haven't even heard of the word lectionary, or daily office is what we call it in the Anglican Episcopal tradition. But I've just started to make my own with one Psalm, one Old Testament passage, and one New Testament passage. And the beauty of this is the people that are doing it with me locally go to 5 or 6 different churches, but whenever we see each other, we don't work together or whatever, but we'll see each other, let's say once a month or once every 2 weeks. You can share your life in the context of the things that you've been reading together. So it's like, oh yeah, I had a hard day today. It reminded me of what we were reading in the book of Jonah. And, we're both immediately on the same page because we're sharing in the same practice, even though we haven't been sharing exactly the same church or the same life. So that's a nice advantage to that. It'd be cool actually to see the TLC do something like that, where there's people who are constantly connecting online, reading the same passages. I don't know if you wanted to say something there, but that's the first one.
Well, no, I was going to say you're calling me out in my secret plan right now.
No way. That's awesome.
Well, I have now had these internet friends that are all, some are church homeless, some are very deeply in church traditions. And then I encounter you and the work you're doing, and I'm going, there's some of the ways that you have just made things local and practical. And that's why I really, really have enjoyed engaging with your work, is because you're not ignoring analytical, theoretical stuff. You're not ignoring reality or the way the world is today, but you're also going, well, I'm not sure exactly what this is going to look like, but this is the direction I'm moving in towards a local embodied community. And everyone I know in my flesh and blood personal life is going, I've got to find a different way of being human because this isn't working for me. And I am worried about my 1-year-old, my 2-year-old, and them growing up in this world. And I'm feeling like, okay, I'm 33 years old. So then I need to take part in reshaping the world based on the guidance of the Spirit of God and trying to help the will of God be here and now. And how do we create a better place for children to grow up?
Totally.
Yeah.
Totally. Yeah. Our destiny is to be the marriage of heaven and earth, right? It's like Genesis 1, he makes the heavens and the earth. That's the first verse of the Bible. And then the very end of the Bible is the marriage of heaven and earth. It is like Revelation 21 is the New Jerusalem coming down, and the marriage of God and his people. And so we are, and I'm sure you're aware of this too, but we are, even in the way that we're created as dust and breath, we are already a prophecy of that last book of the Bible. We're like a living, walking prophecy of the marriage of breath and dust, of heaven and earth. But it's also a role. It's a responsibility and an identity to bring heaven and earth together in everything that we're doing. And so, as someone who mostly thinks and dreams about things, that's always kind of been my natural way. The last 10 years or so has been marked for me by a heavy conviction to do things, to bring the thinking and dreaming down to my own family, my household, and my local community. So that's where these practices come from. The scripture is the first one. Second one is prayer. I say you should. It's very simple. These are all. It's kind of like I was talking about, not Navy SEAL Christian sort of thing. It's like cutting a path in the wilderness. That's really how I see these things. And so it's pray on your knees for the first minute when you wake up, before phone, before anything else. Usually I say you should sleep away from your phone, and then for the last minute before you go to sleep, same thing. After everything else, just your first conscious experience and your last conscious experience for 1 minute is the sort of challenge there. And of course, the idea is not to just keep doing that. It's to let it go to more from there, but start there, baby steps. And then the third is fasting, which is somewhat metaphorical and also actual. It's to like give your life a rhythm of feasting and fasting, which usually needs to happen in community, but it can also happen individually. It's just not quite as ideal. You can do that with mini fasts on Fridays, not eating meat or dairy. Make it a little Good Friday, which is what the Orthodox do. Or you can have seasons of it. We do one fast that we do is cyber fasting on Sundays. It's the one that I've seen be most powerful in our community. We're just a whole bunch of people agree together that they're not going to use the internet in any fashion from sunup to sundown on Sundays. And what that also does is it serves the double purpose of making a Sabbath in your life, which I kind of built into the fasting principle, because of course a Sabbath is a fasting principle in a sense. It's fasting from work, fasting from kinds of activities that you do the other 6 days a week. And for most of us, the internet is the kind of activity we do for the other 6 days a week. So to have one day without it, really, like, it just makes you alive again. It's kind of amazing. And then the fourth one is church. It's just make a commitment to a church and to go and worship the people of God locally somewhere. And the last one is the hardest one for most people, and that's authority. It's to find a spiritual authority in your life. A pastor would be ideal, though sometimes people can't even reach that. And so some kind of spiritual mentor, or you would actually give them authority. That's why I use the word authority, as opposed to just like how we see professional counselors, who usually it's kind of like the customer's always right with that paradigm, which can still be helpful. But this would be the kind of paradigm where the customer's wrong, where you go to someone who can actually speak into your life and say, when you confess to them, let's say, they don't just say like, "Oh, it's okay, brother." They can say that and they can absolve you, but they can also say, "Stop doing that and do this," and that sort of thing. So spiritual authority is the last one.
I mean, you seem to really see following Jesus as a radical endeavor.
Yeah.
And that it's going to require sacrifice, and that your life is going to end up looking different as you pick up a cross and start walking.
Yeah. That's how I understand basically all of Paul's epistles. Is he's giving, people always think that Paul is just giving this like theological doctrine. But if you read any of his letters, what he does is he does speak in terms of theological doctrine. And then he says, at some point in all of his letters, he basically says like, now stop doing all these things and start doing all these things. And then you will see what I mean by the whole first part of this. Like, you are justified, therefore be this kind of person. You are sanctified, therefore be sanctified. And so without stopping that list of things and starting the new, I know I hate to sound like a moralist here, but I don't think that Paul is a moralist. I definitely don't. I think he's just marrying heaven and earth. And he knows that if the churches that are receiving his letters do not do that, if they do not embody the kinds of doctrines that he is preaching, then they won't believe them. They'll think they do, and it will be the worst case scenario because they will have been inoculated from the real disease. They will have gotten a little shot of Christian statements without the real disease, which is to die with Christ so that you can be risen again with him.
Yeah. Okay. From those 5 practices, I was thinking this when I read it a couple days ago, and I wanted to ask you, do you see a need for, I don't know what you call it, yearly rhythms attached to the moon, the sun, feast traditions, religious holidays? How do you see that greater calendar as involved with? Is that where like the parish church would come in?
Yeah,
between,
for sure. Yeah, you need feasting and fasting to be a village. You need seasons to be. I think you need seasons to be a human. We've been doing a grand experiment where we erased seasons a little while ago, and we're still trying to be humans. And I don't know how well we're succeeding at it. I guess we kind of are. So maybe we're proving me wrong, but I think we're also proving me right. It's dangerous to erase seasons because time is linear, but time is also cyclical. And so, I mean, if you want to get like hyper philosophical for a second, it's like a straightforward moving line with like cycles that are moving with that line the whole time. So yes, I once was 10 years old and now I'm 40 years old. And so I've had 30 Christmases in that time, but each one of those Christmases keeps recurring, and yet recurring somehow further down the line, so that, I mean, hopefully it's a deeper Christmas than the one before. So it's not just the snake eating its tail of cycle only, but it's also not just the line only, because Christmas keeps coming. Or like I was saying about Good Friday, it doesn't just come once a year, it also comes every Friday, and the resurrection comes every Sunday. And that's why we go to church on Sunday, is because the resurrection is to be celebrated every Sunday. And then you can obviously get even more fractal with it, and you can say the resurrection's supposed to be celebrated every microsecond or whatever, but you have to do it at a, kind of like I was saying about prayer, you have to do it at a sustainable pace where you first say, okay, Christmas once a year, I can do that. And then you can figure out how to celebrate the incarnation in even more fractal ways. And so, yes. And I would say, like you were saying about moon phases or whatever, like, in as much as our rhythms are actually attached to, I mean, God forbid we start believing that God loves nature again and the way that he made our earth to be. But I would say, in as much as it makes us remember that the earth has seasons, and that winter is different than summer, and that our lives might need to look different, and that we could worship and appreciate different things about our God in the middle of winter, the coldest, darkest days of the year, when we celebrate his incarnation than we do in the summer, and that our lives would begin to take a seasonal shape again. Man, don't get me started. That would be amazing.
Yeah, I've been thinking a lot about what it would mean to live seasonally, and all of this, like this whole conversation. Thank you so much. Because it is, I don't know how else to say it besides you're not avoiding theory, but you're also not letting theory just remain up here. You're dragging it down and embodying it and then going, well, tell me if this is right or wrong. I don't know. Like if this theory can't be lived out, then we better find a new theory, because Correct. We're living here and now, and we need to live these things. And
Jesus is so helpful with this, by the way, because when you read, I was talking about Paul a moment ago, but when you read the Gospels, he just tells people to do stuff all the time. Like, he does not shy away from telling people to do stuff. It isn't all that he does. He tells amazing stories and gives amazing images, and he rebukes people sometimes, and he encourages and heals. But all those things, even, you can see as him doing, not just saying. Even his sayings are doings, and all of his doings are parables, in a sense. Everything he does is its own parable. And so his actions are never divorced from their meaning, and his meaningful statements are never divorced from action. And if you begin to just try to do those things, it is quite revolutionary. And so much of the modern ethos really does want to separate heaven and earth, and I think for the most part, it's kind of Gnostic. Maybe not about sex. I think we're kind of obsessed with the physicality of that still in some sense, but for the most part, it's like everything will be better off the more detached from your body you are, and the more detached from the seasons you are, and the more detached from the fact that you're even aging, or that your body can have children, or all these sort of most obvious things. We have become pretty detached from them, and it would be good to reclaim it. And I guess I should say, like, as we're coming to a close, that a lot of the way these things have taken shape in my life has been by accident. Like, I really don't, I guess you can reverse engineer it to some degree, but like, I happen to have a seasonal job. And when I was 22 and started running a surf camp, I wasn't thinking about the seasonality of things in the way that I'm talking about them now, but it did make me and my family something like farmers, where we have a harvest season and everybody's in on it. Like, I teach my kids how to do certain roles within the camp, and they're more connected with me. And that, it's crazy. It's that I'm so busy. I was saying, it's like almost like I go to bed at midnight, wake up at 5 a.m. almost every day for 3 months straight. It's like, that is my heavy work season. And yet I'm more connected with my kids in my heaviest work season than I am in any other season, because it's a job that I can do with them, which is crazy, and there aren't that many people that can say that. And I'm not preaching like, oh, you have to go immediately find something to do that, because I don't know how to do it. It sort of happened to us, but at least I'm grateful that the Lord gave that to me for my own sake, but also because it's a kind of plausibility structure. Like, those kinds of lives do exist, like, you don't have to have the sort of job that your kids could never understand, and that your wife hardly understands, and that you hardly understand, but you're doing it for the digits on the screen. It can be different. You might have to take lots of baby steps to get there. And I think that's what I would say for most people in 9-to-5s who have no idea how they could possibly make a transition. Don't make a transition then. Just start to pray and ask for whatever little baby step you can to further integrate your life with your wife, and then with your kids, with the seasons, with the feasting and fasting that God has called you to in your people and place.
Ross Byrd, thank you.
Yeah,
that's a perfect ending. I mean, I'm excited to send this conversation to like my flesh and blood friends back home in Wisconsin, because these are the things we've been talking about and like thinking about. And so to hear someone be like, hey, I don't mean to be like, oh, I've achieved it, but like,
yeah,
it's not just a wild, foolish dream. And so it's
not
nice. It's nice to see you've got about a decade on me ish. And okay, it's like, okay, I can move in this direction. It is possible, Lord willing. And then it's all those little steps in between from wherever I am now to where I am convinced the Lord is calling me, and my soon to be wife, and our soon to be family, and our soon to be, our local community once again returned. And
what an amazing time for you to be seeing all these things anew, right? When you're about to get married. Super cool.
I'm glad it's now rather than post-marriage, because at least now it's like, between my fiance and I, we've rethought many things, and there's been all kinds of discussions that we hadn't had, and now we are having. Yeah, it's been awesome. It's been awesome.
It's really cool. It's really cool. Well, I'm happy to, be a resource as you keep thinking through it. And like I said, maybe we can do some writing together in the future. I write way less in the summertime, because I'm doing more than I'm thinking, and the rest of the time thinking more than doing. But I look forward to the fall, post surf camp. You and I will reconnect, and there's much work to be done. Sounds great. It's great to get to know you.
You too.
A little bit.
Yeah. I'm going to end the recording.
Cool.